Hi, welcome to My Life, My Choice. My name is Ashley Kim and I'm the National Coordinator of Together for Choice. We are continuing the discussion on the importance of work for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As I shared in the previous episode, in 2019, only 19.3% of persons with a disability were employed. So what can we do about this? Is competitive integrated employment for everyone? Should we close down shelter workshops? What about minimum wage? For this conversation, I'm joined by Tracy May from Opportunity Village.
Hi, Tracy. Welcome.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, can you give us a brief introduction about yourself and Opportunity Village?
My name is Tracy Brown May, and I am serving as the Director of Advocacy Board and Government Relations with a nonprofit organization located in Southern Nevada. Opportunity Village has been around for more than 60 years, and the focus is on serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in a wide array of opportunities.
So let's talk about some sensitive issues because employment is a hot topic for the disability community. What is Section 14C and why are some advocates and policymakers trying to eliminate it?
Well, that's a great question. Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, it is Department of Labor law, so it's employment law. It was passed in 1938, and its original intention was to engage people with disabilities into employment. It was trend-setting at the time. There had never been anything like it, and it was in a time when our country was in a state of depression and people with disabilities were not seen as viable employees. Primarily, it was meant to engage people who had returned from war, who were perhaps missing limbs or had other traumas that they had seen or experienced in their lives so that they could be engaged in employment. Well, as time has passed and the world has changed and people with physical disabilities are much more engaged in our communities, typically speaking, Section 14C's use has been narrowed naturally, I think, over our history. And it is still a tool that's used to engage people with, now more so, and here at my organization, developmental disabilities, as a way to ensure that people who are not able to function at an industrial rate can still be engaged in a productive activity. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's only one tool, and it's not meant to be an employment outcome. It's meant to be a training tool so that we can help people engage in activities where they can be productive. And I think that's where we have a misunderstanding between advocates who want to eliminate Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act and the advocates who want to preserve it. So they're on two opposite sides of a fence, and they're both trying to be heard very loudly.
Well, the advocates that are trying to eliminate 14C say that people with disabilities are still earning wages below minimum wage and that they have not integrated into the community, and make it sound like the purpose of 14C was supposed to serve more as a transitional tool, not for something permanent. So what does that mean for people who have lifelong disability, especially severe disability?
Okay, so that's a really detailed question, and we can truly get into how do you break down what is employment versus what is a long-term support, right? And I think that's where our conversation is evolving to in this day and age. The advocates on the other side of the fence who would like to eliminate Section 14C believe that it's a violation of an individual's civil rights that they would earn less than minimum wage for any job. And then what we're saying in essence is that a person with a disability is less than any other person who would be mandated minimum wage. That may have been true in 1938 when the law was passed, or in the 50s, or even the 60s, or before deinstitutionalization. I feel like we can speak here at Opportunity Village that that's not how that 14C wage certificate is utilized, and it's not utilized that way with the provider groups that we're familiar with. There have been times when organizations have taken advantage of the 14C wage certificate and used it to exploit people with disabilities. Those are horrible things, and we never want to support that. Simultaneously, we don't ever want to get rid of a tool that is engaging someone who has a barrier to an activity, to gainful employment. So that is the side of the fence where we are. We don't view a 14C wage certificate as actual employment, right? So a person who is utilizing the 14C wage certificate is not earning anything close to minimum wage. And I can tell you at Opportunity Village, the folks that are earning some type of remuneration under that wage are producing at less than 30% industrial productivity, right? So that's less than 30% of what they would be expected to produce for any employer. That means they probably are never going to achieve employment. Well, that we don't feel like that's fair. Everybody should have an opportunity to be engaged in some type of activity that's beneficial. So this is where we want to utilize a 14C wage certificate to continue to encourage folks to be as productive as they can without punishing them because they have a debilitating disability that they need to work through. That may never get better.
But some would argue that that's where the reasonable accommodation for people with disability would come along, that people that are not as productive should have the right amount of support, and with that appropriate support would be able to reach that productivity rate. And that frankly, some people can say that even people without disability do not achieve 100% productivity rate, and therefore, and that they should not be treated differently. So how do you respond to that?
I think that you're absolutely right. No human being can produce at 100% productivity all the time. And we would certainly never expect that any person with a disability would be an exception to that rule. However, I would say that if you're producing probably at 50% on average above, right, you should earn minimum wage. We make that a practice here at Opportunity Village. So if you are inching up toward 35% or 40% of productivity, we're working with you to develop a training program to get you into employment outside of our roots, right? Outside of us as a program. And I know many other organizations do that as well. So what happens when you're the guy that's producing less than 30%, right? Do we just give up on you? A reasonable accommodation has to be reasonable. There's no real definition for what is reasonable, right? So if you're talking about, do you pay somebody who's producing at 20% of an industrial rate, do you pay them minimum wage? Who pays the bill? I would certainly never suggest we shouldn't do that. The question then becomes, how do you make it a sustainable program? And then does it become like a welfare program? So we have more questions, I think, than we have answers. The goal is to treat every human being with dignity and respect, and also to encourage people to be engaged in community and be productive. So if you don't have a 14C wage certificate, what then is the offset? How do you support that person outside of a 14C wage certificate so they can be productive?
Yeah, so what would happen to people at Opportunity Village if 14C gets eliminated?
I will tell you, if a 14C wage certificate were to be eliminated tomorrow, and it would be illegal to engage people in that activity-based program where they could receive some kind of compensation, they just wouldn't earn a paycheck. So it wouldn't be the provider that gets hurt, it would be the person with a disability that now would not have access to that paycheck. Now, there are those who think that if 14C wage certificates go away, people would just miraculously be employed at minimum wage in a community setting. But we're seeing that that's not the reality. Many people don't want to go into full-time employment or even part-time employment because their disability precludes them from doing that in a healthy and successful way long-term. So they would just be relegated to activities programs that wouldn't have access to a wage at all.
If there are activities and programs in your neighborhood, if they're lucky to have that access, right?
Yes.
Well, how about for those that have severe behavioral or medical challenges?
That's a great question. Every single person has to overcome that, right? So how do you fund that support? That's the question, and why we would want to continue to utilize a 14C wage certificate. Because if you have a person with a severe behavioral issue or a medical condition, they may be better served by people who are trained to offer that support. That's why we want to continue to utilize a 14C wage certificate. Most oftentimes, that's the person who's not going to be performing anywhere close to an industrial rate, and they need extra support. They're probably at 20, 25, 30% of an industrial rate. We want to make sure that they still have access to some kind of compensation for their productivity.
And so I know that you see and talk to a lot of families across the country. You work with many advocates across the country. What do you hear from the families and service providers and advocates?
We're hearing that they still want choices, right? So let's go back to the data and how that is representative of families. The nonprofit community was developed to support families that had needs. And when we close nonprofits that are supporting those families, those people have to go somewhere. We've never really been able to track what happens when a sheltered workshop is closed. That data does not exist. We continue to ask for that. National partners ask for that, but there isn't any data to support what happens to a person when they no longer are connected to a sheltered workshop or their day activity program. We don't really know why that is, because they were in the system for so long. Another data point, and from families, is the United States Department of Labor Office of Disability Employment Policy recently held an open line call-in to find about how people felt about the 14C wage certificate, right? Now we heard that thousands of calls went in and were recorded. We ask for that information as advocates so that we can truly understand this issue and how we can serve people with disabilities better. But to date, there has been no information released from the federal government, from the Department of Labor, that tells us how people truly feel about a 14C wage certificate. I think that the provider community, the people who are here to support people with disabilities, want the data. And if you could support that, people can be better engaged in other ways through data. We'll change our programs to do that. But if you have family members and individuals with disabilities coming to you asking for you to continue your programming, that's why we were created. So we want to continue to do that. Because their voices are not being heard, they're starting advocacy organizations across the country. The A-Team is one example, and they stand for Advocacy, Awareness, and Advisement. They're advocating on their own behalf to support their choices of sheltered employment training as a viable outcome for their family members who have significant disabilities. So the family members are telling us to keep going. That's what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep utilizing that tool as long as we are able to do that, because our family members are asking for it.
So what is your word of encouragement for families that are looking for employment options for their loved ones?
Ooh, never give up. Always tell your story and always ask for what you think you need, because you're the expert. Just remember, if you take nothing away from advocacy other than this one thing, you are the expert. You know what's best for you. And that's how we have to all go at it, right? For so many years, groups have been marginalized across our country and around the world. If you're in that marginalized group, you have to continually ask for what it is that you need to be successful. Never give up. Never stop talking.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us today. I hope you stay safe and well. Have a great day.
Thanks
Take care.
so much. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.